Chapter 1. The Letter in the Attic. The rain tapped a gentle rhythm on the slate roof of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, a melody that suited the quiet introspection of a late spring afternoon in 1965. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old books, and the parlour was aglow with the soft light of a single lamp. Miss Marple, her silver hair neatly pinned and her knitting needles clicking with practised ease, sat by the window, her sharp eyes occasionally drifting to the drizzle outside. But today her mind was not on the weather or the half-finished scarf in her lap. It was on the attic. "Really, Jane," she murmured to herself, setting the knitting aside, "you've put it off long enough." The attic had been calling to her for weeks, ever since young Lucy Islesbarrow, her friend and occasional housekeeper, had mentioned the clutter up there while fetching an old teapot. "It's a treasure trove, Miss Marple," Lucy had said, with a grin, or a fire hazard, depending on your perspective. Miss Marple, ever curious, had resolved to sort through the boxes herself, if only to satisfy her nagging suspicion that something important lay buried among the dust and memories. Climbing the narrow stairs with a flashlight in hand, she felt a twinge of anticipation. The attic was a cramped space, its slanted ceiling hung with cobwebs and its floorboards creaking underfoot. Boxes of her late aunt's belongings mingled with relics of her own past. Letters, photographs, a chipped porcelain dog she'd won at a fair in 1923. She began with a trunk near the window, its leather cracked but its lock still intact. Inside she found faded linens, a bundle of ration books from the war, and tucked beneath a folded shawl, a small wooden box no larger than a cigar case. Miss Marple's fingers paused. The box was carved with a delicate pattern of roses, its lid secured by a tarnished brass clasp. She opened it carefully, revealing a single folded letter, yellowed with age but preserved with care. The paper was heavy, the kind used for important correspondence, and it bore no address or signature. Instead, it was filled with a series of numbers and symbols, arranged in neat rows like a cryptogram from a wartime codebook. "Well now," she said softly, her eyes narrowing, "what have we here?" She carried the box downstairs, settling at her dining table with a magnifying glass and a notepad. The letter's contents were indecipherable at first glance. 17, 4, 9, 3, 12, 8, KRZ, 921. On and on it went, a puzzle that seemed to mock her. But there was something else, a faint inscription on the inside of the box's lid, written in a looping feminine hand. "For tea, my heart's cipher." E.W. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind already racing. E.W.T. Initials that stirred a vague memory, a whisper of village gossip from decades past. St. Mary Mead was a small place, its scandals etched into the collective memory like engravings on a headstone. She recalled a story from the 1940s, one she'd heard in passing while visiting her nephew Raymond. A young woman named Eleanor Wren, beautiful and headstrong, who'd fallen in love with a man named Thomas Hale. Their romance, the village had whispered, ended in tragedy, Thomas found dead in a ditch, his skull fractured, and Eleanor vanished soon after, leaving behind a trail of rumours about jealousy, betrayal, and a missing fortune. "Eleanor Wren," Miss Marple said aloud, testing the name. "And Thomas Hale, could this be your letter?" She turned the paper over, noticing a faint watermark. A crest she recognised as belonging to the old Wren family, who'd once owned a grand house on the edge of the village. The house was long gone, burned down in 47, but its secrets, it seemed, had found their way to her attic. The coded letter, she suspected, was more than a love note. It was a clue, perhaps to the truth behind Thomas's death, a murder that had never been solved. As the rain slowed to a drizzle, Miss Marple sipped her tea and considered her next move. The letter was a challenge, a mystery wrapped in the tender language of a lost love. She would need help to decode it. Perhaps young Peter, the vicar's nephew, who'd studied mathematics at Oxford and had a knack for puzzles. But more than that, she would need to tread carefully. St. Mary Mead had a way of guarding its secrets, and some truths once unearthed brought danger with them. She smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the carved roses on the box. "A romance that ended in blood," she murmured. "Let's see what story you have to tell, my dear." Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over St. Mary Mead's cobbled lanes. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her sensible tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, walked briskly toward the vicarage, the coded letter and its rose-carved box tucked safely in her handbag. Her mind buzzed with questions, each one tethered to the names Eleanor Wren and Thomas Hale. The village, she knew, held the key to their story, its memories preserved in the minds of those who'd lived through the war years. At the vicarage, she found Peter Grayson, the vicar's nephew, hunched over a chessboard in the garden, a lanky young man of 22, with unruly brown hair and a quick smile. Peter was known for his brilliance with numbers and his tendency to lose track of time. He looked up as Miss Marple approached, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, standing. "Is this a social call, or have you brought me a puzzle?" "A puzzle, I'm afraid," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "And a rather intriguing one." She handed him the letter, explaining its discovery and the cryptic inscription. Peter's face lit up as he scanned the rows of numbers and letters. "This is a substitution cipher, I'd wager," he said, tapping the paper. "Maybe a Vigenère, given the era. But I'll need time to crack it. The key might be in that inscription, my heart's cipher." "A name, perhaps?" Miss Marple nodded, pleased with his enthusiasm. "Do what you can, Peter, but be discreet. This letter may stir up old wounds." Leaving Peter to his work, she set out to gather the village's memories. Her first stop was Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, who'd been a young mother during the war and knew every scrap of gossip St. Mary Mead had to offer. Over tea in the vicarage parlour, Mrs. Clement's eyes widened at the mention of Eleanor Wren. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, stirring her tea with a clink. She was a beauty. Dark hair, eyes like violets. The Wren girls were the talk of the village, you know. Eleanor and her sister Clara lived in that big house on the hill. Their father was a banker, left them a fortune when he died in 38. But Eleanor had her heart set on Thomas Hale, a carpenter's son, not the match her family wanted. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression attentive but neutral. And Thomas's death. Mrs. Clement leaned forward, her voice dropping. Found in a ditch near the old mill, summer of 42. Head bashed in, poor lad. The police called it a robbery gone wrong, but no one believed it. Thomas wasn't the sort to carry money, and his tools were still in his bag. Folk whispered it was jealousy, someone who wanted Eleanor for himself. "Any names come to mind?" Miss Marple asked gently. Mrs. Clement hesitated, then said, "Lord Ashton, perhaps. He was sweet on Eleanor, and his family owned half the county. But he was away at the front when it happened. And then there was Clara, Eleanor's sister. She never approved of Thomas. Some said she'd do anything to keep the family name clean." Miss Marple filed the names away, her mind already weaving connections. She thanked Mrs. Clement and moved on, visiting old Mr. Harrow at the post office and Widow Gibbs, who'd once worked as a maid for the Wrens. Their stories painted a vivid picture. Eleanor, defiant and in love. Thomas, earnest and hard-working, and a village simmering with envy and secrets. Mr. Harrow recalled a rumour about a hidden fortune, gold or bonds, stashed by the Wren patriarch before his death. Widow Gibbs hinted at a falling out between Eleanor and Clara, just weeks before. Thomas's murder. Clara was cold, that one, Gibbs said, her arthritic hands folding a shawl. Loved her sister, but loved status more. After Thomas died, Eleanor left the village, no one knows where. Clara stayed till the house burned down, then moved to London. Never spoke of Eleanor again. By late afternoon, Miss Marple returned, home, her notebook filled with fragments of the past. Eleanor and Thomas's romance had been a spark in a tinderbox, igniting passions and rivalries that ended in blood. The coded letter, she suspected, held the truth, not just of their love, but of the motive behind Thomas's death. Was it jealousy, as the village believed, or something more tangible, like the rumoured fortune? As she settled into her armchair, the telephone rang. It was Peter, his voice brimming with excitement. "Miss Marple, I've made progress. The cipher's key is Thomas. I've decoded the first line. It mentions a meeting at the Oak by the Mill." "Does that mean anything to you?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "It does, Peter. It means we're getting closer." She hung up, her gaze drifting to the rose-carved box on the table. The oak by the mill was still there, a gnarled sentinel near the site of Thomas's death. Whatever Eleanor had meant to tell Thomas, it was worth hiding in code, and perhaps worth killing for. Chapter 3. The Village Remembers. The air in St. Mary Mead carried the scent of blooming lilacs as Miss Jane Marple made her way along the High Street, her straw hat tilted against the midday sun. It was the kind of spring day that invited confidences, and she intended to coax a few from the village's older residents. The coded letter, now partially decoded by young Peter Grayson, pointed to a meeting at the oak by the mill, a place forever linked to Thomas Hale's murder. But to understand the why of it, Miss Marple needed more than clues. She needed the village's memory, its whispered truths and buried grudges. Her first stop was the bakery, where Mrs. Price, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a sharp tongue, had been a fixture since the war. Miss Marple bought a currant bun, lingering as she eased the conversation toward the past. Eleanor Wren and Thomas Hale, Mrs. Price said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, I remember them. She was like something out of a picture show, all grace and fire. Thomas, though, quiet, steady. Built my old man a table that's still standing. Didn't deserve what happened to him." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but probing. "The village thought it was a robbery, didn't they? But you didn't." Mrs. Price snorted, leaning over the counter. "Robbery, my foot! Thomas had nothing worth stealing, save Eleanor's heart. No, it was spite, mark my words. Someone couldn't stand seeing them together. I always thought Lord Ashton had a hand in it. He'd watch Eleanor like she was his property, even after he went off to war. His valet, that shifty Reggie Cole, was in the village the night Thomas died. Never liked the look of him." "Reggie Cole," Miss Marple repeated, committing the name to memory. "Was he close to Lord Ashton?" "Thick as thieves," Mrs. Price said. "Did his dirty work, if you ask me. But no one questioned a lord's man, not back then." Thanking her, Miss Marple moved on, her steps leading to the village green, where old Mr. Tuttle sat on a bench, feeding crumbs to the pigeons. At 80, his mind was a patchwork of clarity and fog. But his eyes lit up when Miss Marple mentioned the Wrens. "Eleanor and Clara," he said, his voice raspy. "Chalk and cheese, those two. Eleanor was warm, always slipping me a sweet when I delivered their coal. Clara, though, she'd stare right through you. After their father died, there was talk of money hidden in that house. Gold, some said, or bonds from the bank. Never found, far as I know." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Did anyone suspect where it might be?" Mr. Tuttle scratched his chin. "Thomas Hale, maybe. He was working on the Wren house that summer, fixing the roof. If anyone stumbled on a hiding place, it'd be him. Maybe that's why he got killed. Not love, but greed." The idea settled into Miss Marple's mind like a puzzle piece, clicking into place. A hidden fortune could explain a great deal. Jealousy was a powerful motive, but so was money. She thanked Mr. Tuttle and continued her rounds, stopping at the church to speak with Miss Hartnell, a spinster with a knack for remembering everyone's business. Miss Hartnell, polishing the pews, pursed her lips at the mention of Eleanor. "That girl was trouble," she said, running off with a carpenter when she could have had Lord Ashton. And Clara? Oh, she was furious. I saw them arguing by the mill one evening, just before Thomas died. Clara said something about ruining the family. Eleanor looked heartbroken. Do Clara ever mention Thomas directly? Miss Marple asked. Not to me, Miss Hartnell admitted. But she was tight with Reggie Cole, Lord Ashton's valet. I always thought it odd. A Wren sister and a servant, whispering like conspirators. By the time Miss Marple returned home, her notebook was brimming with names and motives. Lord Ashton, with his unrequited love. Reggie Cole, his loyal and possibly ruthless valet. Clara Wren, protective of her family's status, and the spectre of a hidden fortune, tying them all to Thomas's death. The oak by the mill, mentioned in the decoded letter, was no random meeting place. It was the heart of the tragedy. As she sat by her fire, sipping chamomile tea, the telephone rang. Peter's voice crackled through the line, eager and a touch triumphant. Miss Marple, I've decoded more of the letter. It mentions the stone under the oak and our future. Sounds like Eleanor was planning something with Thomas, maybe an elopement, or hiding something valuable. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Well done, Peter. I think it's time I paid a visit to that oak. She hung up, her thoughts circling the mill. The stone under the oak could hold the next clue, or the truth about a romance that ended in blood. But she knew better than to rush. The village had given her its whispers. Now it was up to her to listen carefully, for the past had a way of reaching into the present. Chapter 4. Cracking the Code. The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the dining table where she sat with Peter Grayson. The coded letter lay between them, its cryptic symbols now partially unravelled thanks to Peter's efforts. The young cryptographer's notebook was a tangle of scribbles, tables, alphabets, and crossed-out guesses, but his eyes shone with the thrill of the chase. It's definitely a Vigenère cipher, Peter said, pushing his glasses up his nose. The key was Thomas, as I suspected. We've got the first 2 lines decoded. Meet me at the oak by the mill. The stone under the oak holds our future. The rest is trickier. There's a second layer, maybe a different key. I'm working on it, but it'll take time. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. You've done splendidly, Peter. The oak by the mill is where Thomas Hale was found dead. That stone may hold more than a romantic promise. Peter's eyebrows shot up. You think it's tied to the murder? A hidden fortune, like the village rumours? Perhaps, she said, her tone measured. Or perhaps it's a truth Eleanor Wren couldn't share openly. We'll know more once you finish the decoding. But for now, I'd like to see that oak myself. Leaving Peter to his calculations, Miss Marple donned her coat and set out for the mill, a mile beyond the village. The path wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. The old mill, its wheel long stilled, stood by a sluggish stream, and beside it loomed the ancient oak, its gnarled branches casting a shadow over the ground where Thomas Hale had died 23 years ago. She circled the tree, her sharp eyes scanning the roots. There, half buried in the earth, was a flat stone, moss-covered but distinct. Kneeling with care, she was no longer as spry as she'd once been. She brushed away the dirt, revealing a slab about the size of a dinner plate. It was heavy, but with a stick as a lever, she pried it loose. Beneath it was a hollow, empty, save for a scrap of faded ribbon, its blue silk frayed but unmistakable. Miss Marple sat back on her heels, the ribbon in her hand. "Eleanor's," she murmured, recalling Widow Gibbs's description of the blue ribbons Eleanor Wren favoured. The ribbon was no treasure, but it was a sign that the letter's instructions had been followed. Whatever had been hidden here, money, bonds, or something else, was gone, likely taken the night Thomas died. As she stood, a rustle in the bushes made her turn. A figure emerged, Mrs. Bantry, her old friend, out for a walk with her spaniel. "Jane Marple, what on earth are you doing digging in the dirt?" Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, her eyes wide with curiosity. Miss Marple chuckled, slipping the ribbon into her pocket. "Chasing ghosts, Dolly, or rather, chasing their secrets." Over tea at Mrs. Bantry's sprawling manor, Miss Marple shared the outlines of the mystery, omitting the finer details. Mrs. Bantry, ever eager for a scandal, clapped her hands. "A coded love letter! It's like something out of a novel. But, Jane, do you think Eleanor hid the Wren fortune here, and someone killed Thomas to get it?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said, stirring her tea, "but I suspect the fortune was a lure, a story to distract from a simpler motive, love or hate. The ribbon suggests Eleanor came to the oak, but whether she left with the treasure or with nothing, we don't yet know." Back home, Peter greeted her with news. "I've cracked the next part of the letter," he said, handing her a sheet of paper. The key for the second layer was Eleanor. It says, "If I fall, seek the rose in the ashes. Trust no one." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "The rose in the ashes," she repeated. "The Wren house burned down in 47. Perhaps something was left behind, hidden in the ruins." Peter frowned. "But the site's just a field now. And trust no one. That's ominous. Do you think Eleanor knew she was in danger?" "I think she knew more than she could safely say," Miss Marple replied. "And I think it's time we learned what became of her after Thomas's death." As Peter returned to his decoding, Miss Marple sat by her window, the blue ribbon in her hand. The letter was leading her deeper into a web of betrayal, where love had been a spark and murder the flame. The rose in the ashes was her next clue, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone in St. Mary Mead, someone still living, knew more than they were saying. Chapter 5. The Shadow of Suspicion. The evening settled over St. Mary Mead with a soft hush, the village lights twinkling like stars against the dusk. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, the rose-carved box open before her. its cryptic letter now a map of secrets. Peter's latest decoding, "If I fall, seek the rose in the ashes, trust no one," had sharpened her focus. The Wren house, reduced to rubble after the 1947 fire, held the next clue, but the warning to trust no one lingered like a chill. The past was stirring, and with it new suspects were stepping into the light. Miss Marple's first task was to trace the living threads of the old scandal. Lord Ashton, Clara Wren, and Reggie Cole, the valet, had all been named in village whispers, but their whereabouts in 1965 were unclear. She began with a visit to the village hall, where Miss Weatherby, the meticulous keeper of records, maintained a trove of genealogies and news clippings. "Lord Ashton," Miss Weatherby said, adjusting her spectacles as she leafed through a ledger. "He's still alive, you know. Lives in a manor near Danemouth. A bit of a recluse since his wife died. Never remarried after Eleanor Wren turned him down. As for Clara Wren, she moved to London after the fire. I heard she married a solicitor, but they say she's back in the county, living quietly in Much Benham." "And Reggie Cole?" Miss Marple asked, her tone casual. Miss Weatherby frowned. "That one's harder to pin down. He left St. Mary Mead after the war, but there were rumours he stayed in Lord Ashton's employ. A slippery character, if you ask me." Armed with this, Miss Marple decided to approach Lord Ashton first. She telephoned Mrs. Bantry, whose social connections stretched across the county, and secured an invitation to tea at Ashton Manor the following day. "Be careful, Jane," Mrs. Bantry warned. "He's charming, but there's a hardness too. Him always was." The manor was a grand ivy-clad pile, its gardens meticulously kept, but its halls dim with the weight of old money. Lord Ashton, now in his late 50s, greeted Miss Marple with a polished smile. Tall, with silver-streaked hair and piercing blue eyes, he carried the air of a man accustomed to command. "Miss Marple," he said, pouring tea in the drawing-room, "Mrs. Bantry tells me you're interested in village history. Something about the Wrens?" She smiled, her eyes keen behind their mild facade. "Indeed, I've come across a letter from Eleanor Wren, written to Thomas Hale. It suggests their romance was more complicated than the village knew." Ashton's hand paused, the teapot hovering. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice tinged with something unreadable. "She was extraordinary. I cared for her deeply, but she chose Hale, a carpenter." He set the teapot down, his smile tight. "His death was a tragedy. I was at the front when it happened, of course." "Of course," Miss Marple echoed, noting the flicker in his eyes. "But your valet, Reggie Cole, was here, wasn't he? Some say he was devoted to you." Ashton's expression hardened. "Reggie was loyal, yes, but he had no part in that business. He left my service years ago. I don't know where he is now." Miss Marple sipped her tea, letting the silence stretch. Ashton was guarded, but his reaction to Reggie's name betrayed a crack in his composure. She thanked him and left, her mind turning to Clara Wren. A call to Much Benham's postmistress confirmed Clara, now Mrs. Clara Langley, lived in a modest cottage. Miss Marple arranged to visit the next morning, posing as a genealogist researching the Wren family. Clara was a thin woman of 60, her once dark hair now streaked with grey, her eyes sharp with suspicion. I don't see why anyone cares about Eleanor now," she said, serving tea in a cramped parlour. "She ran off after Thomas died. Broke my heart, leaving me to deal with the house and the rumours." Miss Marple tilted her head. "There were bad rumours of a fortune hidden in your father's house. Did Eleanor ever mention it?" Clara's lips thinned. "Father left us comfortable, nothing more. People love to invent treasures. Eleanor was foolish, chasing love over duty. Thomas was beneath her, yet someone thought him worth killing," Miss Marple said gently. "Perhaps someone who wanted Eleanor for themselves, or the fortune they believed she held." Clara's cup rattled in its saucer. "I had nothing to do with it. I was with friends the night he died. Ask anyone." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind alert. Clara's defensiveness, like Ashton's, hid something, and Reggie Cole, the missing link, was a shadow neither would clarify. That evening, Peter arrived with a breakthrough. "The final part of the letter," said, handing her a transcription. "It says, 'The rose marks the truth. If I'm gone, find it where the fire began.'" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "The fire began in the Wren house. We need to visit the ruins, Peter, tomorrow after I see Clara. But we must be cautious. Someone may not want that truth found." Peter left. Miss Marple sat by her fire, the blue ribbon from the oak in her hand. Lord Ashton, Clara, Reggie Cole, each cast a shadow over Eleanor and Thomas's story. The rose in the ashes was close, but so was danger, for the past was never truly buried in St. Mary Mead. Chapter 6. A Grave Discovery. The morning mist clung to the fields of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of the hedgerows as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the churchyard. Her visit to Clara Langley the previous day had left her with more questions than answers. Clara's sharp denials and nervous glances suggested a truth she wasn't ready to share. But the decoded letters, final clue, "The rose marks the truth. If I'm gone, find it where the fire began," pointed to the ruins of the Wren house. Before exploring the site, Miss Marple felt a pull toward another piece of the puzzle: Thomas Hale's grave. The churchyard was quiet, its ancient yews casting long shadows over weathered headstones. Thomas's grave, tucked in a corner near the iron gate, was modest. A simple slab engraved with his name, dates 1918-1942, and the words "Beloved Son." Miss Marple knelt beside it, her gloved hands brushing away a layer of moss. The stone was cracked, but not from age. The fracture looked deliberate, as if struck with force. "Curious," she murmured, her eyes narrowing. She examined the ground around the grave, noting a patch of earth that seemed looser than the rest, as if recently disturbed. With a small trowel from her bag, she always carried one for gardening, she probed the soil. A few inches down, her trowel struck something hard. Digging carefully, she unearthed a metal tin, rusted but intact, no larger than a biscuit box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a photograph and a folded note. The photograph showed a young man. Thomas, she presumed, with earnest eyes and a shy smile, standing beside a woman whose face was obscured by a tear in the image. The note, in the same looping hand as the letter's inscription, read, "If you find this, I'm gone. The rose is my confession." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The tin was a message from Eleanor, hidden where no one would think to look. But why the grave? And why was the stone cracked? She tucked the tin into her bag, her mind racing. The damage to the headstone suggested someone else had been here, perhaps searching for the same truth she sought. Her next stop was the site of the Wren house, a half-mile from the village. Peter Grayson met her there, his satchel bulging with notebooks and a flashlight. The ruins were little more than a grassy field now, dotted with blackened stones and the faint outline of a foundation. The fire of 1947 had been thorough, leaving no trace of the grand house that once stood. The letter said where the fire began, Peter said, scanning the ground. Any idea what that means? Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the far corner of the site. Mrs. Clement once told me the fire started in the library. The Wrens had a rose motif in their decor, carved into furniture, embroidered on curtains. If Eleanor hid something, it would be marked with a rose. They searched the area where the library once stood, sifting through weeds and debris. Peter, ever thorough, used a stick to probe the earth. After an hour, he called out, "Miss Marple, look at this!" He'd uncovered a stone slab, half buried and etched with a faint rose. Together they shifted it, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside was a leather pouch, its contents damp but preserved, a locket with a rose engraving, and a folded letter sealed with wax. The locket held a tiny portrait of Eleanor, her violet eyes unmistakable. The letter, addressed to Thomas, was unopened. Miss Marple broke the seal with care. The letter read, "My love, if you're reading this, I've failed. The fortune is a lie, a trap set by those I trusted. I've hidden the truth in the rose. Forgive me." Peter whistled softly. "No fortune? Then what got Thomas killed?" "Something more dangerous," Miss Marple said, her voice low. "A secret someone was willing to kill for, and perhaps still is." As they left the ruins, Miss Marple glanced back, a prickle of unease at her neck. The cracked gravestone, the hidden tin, the rose-marked pouch, all pointed to a conspiracy deeper than village gossip. Eleanor had feared for her life, and her warning to trust no one felt more urgent than ever. Lord Ashton, Clara, Reggie Cole, someone had silenced Thomas, and Miss Marple suspected they were watching her now. Back home, she locked the locket and letter in her safe, her mind turning to the photograph's torn face. Whoever had been with Thomas in that image, their identity was key. Tomorrow she would confront Clara again, and perhaps Lord Ashton. The rose was leading her to the truth, but in St. Mary Mead, truth came with a price. Chapter 7. The Rival's Confession. The sky over St. Mary Mead was a tapestry of grey clouds, heavy with the promise of rain, as Miss Jane Marple boarded the bus to Much Benham. The locket and letter from the Wren House ruins weighed heavily in her handbag, their secrets pressing against her thoughts. Eleanor Wren's words, "The fortune is a lie, a trap set by those I trusted," had shifted the mystery's shape. Thomas Hale's murder was no mere act of jealousy or greed. It was a calculated betrayal, and Miss Marple was determined to confront Clara Langley, Eleanor's sister, to uncover her role. Clara's cottage was a tidy affair, its garden overgrown, but neat, a reflection of a woman clinging to respectability. When Miss Marple knocked, Clara opened the door with a wary frown, her grey eyes flicking over her visitor. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice clipped, "I thought we'd said all there was about Eleanor." "Not quite," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but firm. She accepted a seat in the cramped parlour, noting the absence of family photographs. No trace of Eleanor or the Wren legacy. "I've found something of your sister's, a letter hidden where the fire began. It suggests she was in danger before Thomas Hale died." Clara's hands tightened in her lap, her knuckles white. Eleanor was always dramatic. She saw threats where there were none. Miss Marple opened her bag, producing the locket with its rose engraving. This was with the letter. She wrote of a trap, Clara, a fortune that didn't exist. Did you know about it? Clara's gaze locked on the locket, her composure cracking. "That was hers," she whispered. "She wore it always. For him." She looked away, her voice trembling. "I didn't want her hurt, you must believe that. But she was ruining us. Father's debts were piling up, and Eleanor thought love could fix it. Thomas was a dreamer, not a saviour." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes keen. "You argued with her by the mill, didn't you? About Thomas. And the night he died you said you were with friends. But were you, Clara?" Clara's breath hitched, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might bolt. Then, like a dam breaking, words spilled out. "I didn't kill him, but I knew something was going to happen. Reggie Cole came to me that week," said Lord Ashton. "Wanted Thomas out of the way. Not dead, just gone. Ashton was obsessed with Eleanor, thought he could win her if Thomas left. Reggie offered money to help with the debts if I'd convince Eleanor to give Thomas up." "And did you?" Miss Marple asked softly. "I tried," Clara said, tears welling. "I told her Thomas was trouble, that Ashton could save us. She wouldn't listen. The night Thomas died, I was with Reggie, not friends. He said he'd talk to Thomas, scare him off. When I heard Thomas was dead, I knew Reggie had gone too far, but I couldn't say anything. Ashton would have ruined me." Miss Marple's expression remained serene. but her mind was racing. Clara's confession implicated Reggie Cole, and by extension, Lord Ashton. But it felt incomplete, as if she were shielding someone. "Why didn't you tell the police, Clara? And what happened to Eleanor after?" Clara shook her head, her sheer voice breaking. "Eleanor left the next day. She sent me a note, said she couldn't stay where Thomas died. I never saw her again. I swear, I don't know where she went." Miss Marple studied her, noting the anguish in her eyes. Clara was telling the truth, but not all of it. She thanked her and left, the rain now falling in earnest. As the bus carried her back to St. Mary Mead, she turned the locket over in her hands. Reggie Cole was the key, but he was a ghost, vanished after the war. Lord Ashton, however, was within reach, and his polished denials would not hold up much longer. That evening, Peter Grayson arrived at her cottage, his face alight with news. "I've been digging into old records, Miss Marple. Reggie Cole didn't just leave Ashton's service. He was arrested in 48 for blackmail, then released. No one knows where he went after. But I found something else. A marriage record from 1943. Clara Wren married a man named Langley, but there's a witness listed, R. Cole." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Reggie was close to Clara, closer than she admitted, and if he was blackmailing someone, it might explain Eleanor's warning to trust no one." She set the locket on the table, its rose catching the lamplight. Clara's confession had opened a door, but it led to a maze. Reggie Cole had acted on Ashton's orders, or perhaps his own, and the torn photograph from Thomas's grave nagged at her. Whose face had been ripped away? And was Eleanor truly gone? Or had she left one final rose to point to the killer? The rain pattered against her windows. Miss Marple knew the next step was dangerous. She would need to confront Lord Ashton and find Reggie Cole if he was still alive. The truth was close, but so was the shadow of a murderer. Chapter 8. The treasure's trail. The morning sun broke through the clouds, gilding the rooftops of St. Mary Mead, as Miss Jane Marple sat at her dining table, the rose-engraved locket and Eleanor Wren's letter before her. Clara's confession had implicated Reggie Cole and Lord Ashton in Thomas Hale's murder, but the letter's cryptic warning, "The rose marks the truth," suggested a hidden cache, a final piece of Eleanor's story. The trail now led back to the ashes of the Wren house, and Miss Marple was determined to follow it. She enlisted Peter Grayson, whose knack for puzzles had already proven invaluable. Together, they returned to the ruins of the Wren house, armed with a spade and the decoded letter. The field was quiet, the air thick with the scent of wet grass and wild thyme. Miss Marple pointed to the corner where they'd found the rose-edged slab, her eyes scanning the ground for further clues. "The letter mentioned a rose in the ashes," she said, her voice steady. "We found the locket here, but I suspect Eleanor hid something else, something that could only be found after the fire." Peter nodded, kneeling to examine the slab. "The fire started in the library, right? If the rose motif was part of the house, maybe there's another marker, a carving, a tile, something fireproof. They worked methodically, clearing weeds and probing the earth. After an hour, Peter's spade struck a hollow sound. He dug deeper, uncovering a small iron box, its surface scorched but intact, embossed with a faint rose. Miss Marple's heart quickened as she opened it, revealing a bundle of documents tied with a faded ribbon. The topmost was a handwritten note in Eleanor's looping script. "The truth is my dowry. For T, always. E.W. The documents were a revelation. They included a surveyor's map of the Wren estate, marked with an X in the library, and a letter from Eleanor's father, dated 1938. It detailed his financial ruin, not a fortune, but a debt of $10,000 owed to a London bank. A second letter, from Eleanor to Thomas, explained, "Father lied to protect us. There is no gold, only shame. I told Clara the truth, but she won't believe me. If they come for you, it's because they think you know." Peter's eyes widened. No fortune. Then the rumours were a lie. "A lie that cost Thomas his life," Miss Marple said, her voice low. "Someone believed the Wren fortune was real. Lord Ashton, perhaps, or Reggie Cole. They thought Thomas knew where it was hidden, and when Eleanor refused to marry Ashton, they killed him to silence him. The map, however, was the true treasure. The X marked a spot in the library's fireplace, a detail that struck Miss Marple as deliberate. "The fire began in the library," she murmured. "Eleanor knew the house would burn. She hid this box where the flames would preserve it, not destroy it." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple and Peter pored over the map. The fireplace was long gone, but the iron box's survival confirmed Eleanor's foresight. The documents painted a picture of desperation. Eleanor, trying to protect Thomas from a lie. Clara, clinging to a fantasy of wealth. And Ashton, whose obsession with Eleanor may have driven him to murder. Peter frowned, tapping S. "This changes everything, Miss Marple. If there was no fortune, why keep it secret?" "Because the truth was dangerous," she replied. "Eleanor's warning, 'Trust no one,' suggests she feared betrayal. Clara admitted Reggie Cole acted on Ashton's orders, but I suspect Reggie had his own motives. He was arrested for blackmail later, after all." Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the torn photograph from Thomas's grave. The missing face nagged at her. "We need to find Reggie Cole," she said, "or confirm if he's still alive. And Lord Ashton must be confronted again. He's hiding something." Peter hesitated. "Miss Marple, this feels risky. If someone killed for this secret, they might still be watching." She smiled faintly, her eyes sharp. "They might, Peter. But in St. Mary Mead, secrets have a way of surfacing, and I intend to bring this one to light." As Peter left to search for records on Reggie Cole, Miss Marple placed the iron box in her safe, the rose-embossed lid glinting. The treasure wasn't gold, but truth, a truth Eleanor had died to protect. The trail was clear, but the danger was closer than ever, and Miss Marple knew the next move would test her courage. Chapter 9. The second betrayal. The twilight cast long shadows over St. Mary Mead. The village hushed under a sky streaked with violet and gold. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window. The iron box from the Wren House ruins open on the table. Its contents, the surveyor's map, Eleanor's letters, and the damning truth about the Wren family's debts, had upended the myth of a hidden fortune. But the mystery of Thomas Hale's murder was far from solved, and Eleanor's warning, "Trust no one," echoed in Miss Marple's mind. A new threat was emerging, one that mirrored the past in chilling detail. The day had begun with a disturbing discovery. Mrs. Bantry, ever the eager gossip, had telephoned with news. A break-in at the vicarage the previous night. Nothing was stolen, but papers in the study, where Peter Grayson had been decoding the letter, were scattered, and a window was forced open. "It's odd, Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, almost as if someone was looking for something specific. Miss Marple's instincts flared. The break-in was no coincidence. Someone knew she was closing in on the truth. She called Peter, who arrived at her cottage with a worried frown. "I checked my notes," he said, spreading them on the table. "They're all here, but I found this slipped under my door this morning." He handed her a scrap of paper, typed and unsigned. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like Hale." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "A modern crime to match the old," she said. "Whoever wrote this knows about the letter, and fears what we'll find next." Peter's face paled. "Miss Marple, this is getting dangerous. Should we tell the police?" "Not yet," she replied, her voice calm but resolute. "We're close, Peter. The break-in and this note means someone is desperate. We need to find Reggie Cole and confront Lord Ashton." Peter had spent the morning tracking Reggie's trail. "I found a lead," he said. "Reggie Cole was released from prison in 49 after his blackmail charge. There's a record of him working as a groundskeeper in Danemouth until 55, near Ashton's Manor. After that, he vanishes. But I spoke to a clerk who thinks he might be living under a new name, possibly in London." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Lord Ashton. His polished denials during her visit had rung hollow, and Clara's confession tied him to Reggie's actions. She arranged another visit to Ashton Manor, this time with Mrs. Bantry as her companion for safety, and to loosen Ashton's tongue with her relentless chatter. At the manor, Lord Ashton greeted them with strained courtesy, his blue eyes wary. The drawing-room was as grand as before, but the air felt charged, like a storm about to break. Mrs. Bantry launched into a monologue about village fates, giving Miss Marple time to observe Ashton's tightening jaw. "Lord Ashton," Miss Marple said at last, cutting through Mrs. Bantry's chatter, "I've found documents from Eleanor Wren. They prove there was no fortune, only debts. Yet Thomas Hale was killed because someone believed otherwise. Reggie Cole acted on your orders, didn't he?" Ashton's face darkened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Miss Marple. Reggie was my valet, nothing more. I was at the front when Hale died. I had no part in it. "But you wanted Eleanor," she pressed, her voice soft but unyielding. "And when she chose Thomas, you couldn't bear it. Reggie was loyal, perhaps too loyal. Did he kill Thomas to please you?" Ashton stood, his voice rising. "Enough. I loved Eleanor, yes, but I didn't order her lover's death. Reggie, he acted alone, the fool. He thought he was protecting my interests. When I returned and learned what he'd done, I sent him away. That's all I know." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Ashton's anger seemed genuine, but his story was too neat, a shield for deeper guilt. She thanked him and left, Mrs. Bantry trailing behind, whispering, "He's lying, Jane, isn't he?" "Partially," Miss Marple said. "He's protecting someone or himself." That evening a second shock came. Peter, combing through village records, found a death certificate for Eleanor Wren, dated 1943, in a London hospital. Cause: pneumonia. "She didn't vanish," Peter said, stunned. "She died a year after Thomas." Miss Marple's heart sank, but a flicker of doubt remained. The torn photograph from Thomas's grave, the hidden locket, the warnings, Eleanor's story felt unfinished. "We need to verify this," she said, "and find Reggie Cole. He's the link between Ashton, Clara, and the truth." As Peter left, Miss Marple locked her doors, the typed threat in her hand. The break-in, the note, Ashton's half-truths. They were echoes of 1942, a second betrayal unfolding. The rose was close, but so was the killer, and Miss Marple knew the next step would bring them face to face. Chapter 10. The Final Cipher. The air in St. Mary Mead was crisp, the village waking to a morning bathed in pale sunlight. Miss Jane Marple sat at her dining table, the rose-engraved locket and the iron box's documents spread before her. The typed threat, "Stop digging or you'll end up like Hale," lay beside them, a stark reminder that the past was not content to stay buried. Lord Ashton's partial confession and the discovery of Eleanor Wren's death certificate had tightened the mystery's knot. But Miss Marple sensed a final cipher in Eleanor's words, one that would reveal the killer's identity. Peter Grayson arrived early, his satchel stuffed with notes. "I've been rethinking the letter," he said, spreading the original and his transcriptions on the table. The decoded text, "The rose marks the truth," feels incomplete. I ran the numbers, again using a double visionaire, with both Thomas and Eleanor as keys. There's a hidden layer, a single line at the end. He handed her a slip of paper. The new decryption read, "The rose is my sister's lie." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Clara," she murmured. Eleanor was pointing to Clara's betrayal. The fortune was a lie Clara believed, or spread to protect herself. Peter frowned, but Clara confessed she knew Reggie acted for Ashton. Why would Eleanor call it her lie? "Because Clara's role was bigger than she admitted," Miss Marple said. "She didn't just know about Reggie's plan. She helped set the trap. The fortune rumour likely started with her, to lure Thomas to his death." Eleanor realized it too late. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the torn photograph from Thomas's grave. The missing face, she now suspected, was Clara's. Eleanor had hidden the tin to expose her sister's complicity, but someone, Clara or Reggie, had damaged the evidence. The death certificate, too, nagged at her. Eleanor's death in 1943 seemed final, yet her warnings felt alive, as if she'd anticipated discovery. Determined to confirm Clara's role, Miss Marple decided to revisit Much Benham. She telephoned Mrs. Bantry for company, knowing her friend's presence would unsettle Clara. At the cottage, Clara greeted them with a strained smile, her hands fidgeting as she poured tea. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice tight, "I've told you everything. Why keep dragging up Eleanor's mistakes?" Miss Marple's expression was serene, but her words cut like a blade. "Not mistakes, Clara. Betrayals. Eleanor left a message in her letter, hidden in code. She said the rose, the truth, was your lie. You spread the story of a fortune, didn't you, to draw Thomas to the mill where Reggie Cole was waiting." Clara's cup clattered to the table, tea spilling. "That's nonsense. I only wanted Eleanor to see sense. Reggie said he'd scare Thomas, not kill him. I didn't know." "But you did know," Miss Marple pressed. "You told Reggie where Thomas would be. And when Eleanor left, you let her take the blame. Where is Reggie Cole now, Clara? You were close to him, closer than you've admitted." Clara's face crumpled, tears streaming. "Reggie's dead," she whispered. "Died in London 10 years ago. He wrote to me before, begging forgiveness. Said he acted for Ashton, but kept the truth to himself. I burned his letter. I couldn't bear it." Miss Marple studied her, noting the anguish, but also the relief in her eyes. Clara was unburdening herself, but something still felt off. Reggie's death closed one door, but Lord Ashton remained, and the threat against her and Peter suggested a living hand. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple reviewed the evidence with Peter. The death certificate for Eleanor troubled her. "We need to verify it," she said. "If Eleanor died in 43, who's behind the break-in and the note? Ashton protecting his name, or someone we haven't considered?" Peter, digging through hospital records with a contact in London, called later with a bombshell. "The certificate's real, but the hospital has no record of an Eleanor Wren admitted in 43. It's as if the document was forged." Miss Marple's heart raced. "Forged," she repeated. "Then Eleanor may not be dead. She could be alive, hiding, or someone else is guarding her secret." The final cipher was clear. Clara's lie had sparked the murder, but the torn photograph and the forged certificate pointed to a deeper truth. Eleanor's fate was the key, and Miss Marple knew she was one step from unmasking the killer. But the typed threat loomed, a warning that the next rose would come with blood. Chapter 11. The Twist of Fate. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting a soft glow on the rose-engraved locket and the iron box's documents. The revelation that Eleanor Wren's 1943 death certificate was likely forged had upended the mystery, suggesting she might still be alive, or that someone had gone to great lengths to erase her. The final cipher, "The rose is my sister's lie," had exposed Clara's role in spreading the fortune rumour that led to Thomas Hale's murder. But the typed threat against Miss Marple and Peter Grayson hinted at a present danger. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple knew the truth lay in Eleanor's fate, and the torn photograph from Thomas's grave held the final clue. She summoned Peter Grayson, who arrived with a weary but determined look. "I've been cross-checking records," he said, spreading papers on the table. "No trace of Eleanor after 42, beyond that forged certificate. But I found something odd. A marriage license from 1944 in Brighton for an Ellen Winter, witnessed by a Clara Langley. The ages match Eleanor and Clara." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Ellen Winter, a new name to escape the past. If Eleanor survived, she hid well. But why forge a death certificate? And whose face was torn from that photograph? Peter hesitated. "There's more. I tracked down a nurse who worked at the London hospital in 43. She remembers a woman matching Eleanor's description, admitted under a false name for a minor injury, not pneumonia. She left abruptly, saying she was in danger." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the threads. Eleanor fled St. Mary Mead after Thomas's death, fearing for her life. Clara helped her start over, perhaps out of guilt, but someone else, Lord Ashton or another, wanted her gone for good. We need to find Ellen Winter. Her thoughts turned to the photograph. The tear had obscured the woman beside Thomas, but Miss Marple now suspected it wasn't Clara. The face was key to the killer's identity, or Eleanor's survival. She decided to revisit Lord Ashton, whose half-truths had shielded him too long. With Mrs. Bantry's help, she secured an invitation to his manor for lunch, framing it as a social call. Ashton Manor was as imposing as ever, its halls heavy with the scent of polished wood and old secrets. Lord Ashton greeted them with a forced smile, his blue eyes guarded. Mrs. Bantry, oblivious to the tension, chattered about garden shows, while Miss Marple steered the conversation to the past. "Lord Ashton," she said, her voice mild, "I've learned Eleanor Wren may not have died in 43. A forged certificate suggests she fled, perhaps with your knowledge. You loved her. Did you help her disappear, or ensure she stayed silent?" Ashton's fork paused, his face paling. "You're relentless, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "I told you, I was at the front when Hale died. Reggie acted alone, and I sent him away when I learned the truth. As for Eleanor, I heard she died. If she didn't—" He trailed off, his eyes distant. "I wish I'd known," Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the tremor in his hand. Someone tore a photograph from Hale's grave, hiding the face of the woman beside him. Was it you, protecting Eleanor, or yourself? Ashton stood, his voice sharp. "I've had enough of your accusations. Leave, both of you." Mrs. Bantry gasped, but Miss Marple rose calmly, her gaze never leaving Ashton. "The truth will out, Lord Ashton. It always does." Back in St. Mary Mead, a shock awaited. Peter, digging through village archives, had found a faded newspaper clipping from 1942, buried in a gossip column. A mention of Eleanor Wren seen with a woman at the mill, days before Thomas's death. The description, tall, fair-haired, aristocratic, didn't match Clara. Miss Marple's heart raced as she recalled a detail from Mrs. Clement. Lord Ashton's sister, Lady Margaret, had been in St. Mary Mead that summer, a quiet figure who'd left soon after. "Margaret," Miss Marple whispered. "The torn photograph. It was her." The twist struck like lightning. Lady Margaret, in love with Thomas or jealous of Eleanor, had been at the mill. Reggie Cole, acting for Ashton, may have been her tool, or her scapegoat. Eleanor's flight and the forged certificate suggested she'd seen Margaret that night, a truth too dangerous to reveal. Miss Marple now suspected Margaret, not Ashton, had orchestrated the murder, with Clara and Reggie as pawns. "We need to find Lady Margaret," she told Peter, "and Ellen Winter. The rose is Eleanor's truth, and it points to a killer still among us." As the sun set, Miss Marple locked her doors, the typed threat burning in her mind. The twist of fate had revealed a new suspect, but the final confrontation loomed, and she knew the rose would bloom with blood. Chapter 12. The Resolution. The parlour of Miss Jane Marple's cottage glowed with the soft light of a single lamp, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the truth she had uncovered. The rose-engraved locket, the iron box's documents, and the torn photograph lay on the table, silent witnesses to a decades-old crime. Lady Margaret, Lord Ashton's sister, had emerged as the shadow behind Thomas Hale's murder, her face likely the one ripped from the photograph. Eleanor Wren, alive as Ellen Winter, had fled to escape her. But the typed threat, "Stop digging, or you'll end up like Hale," proved the killer's reach extended to 1965. Tonight, Miss Marple would end it. She had invited the key players to her cottage under the guise of a village history discussion. Lord Ashton, Clara Langley, and Mrs. Bantry for moral support. Peter Grayson, stationed at the vicarage, had traced Lady Margaret to a nursing home in Danemouth, frail but alive. Miss Marple had also located Ellen Winter, now a reclusive widow in Brighton, through a discreet inquiry to a former Wren family friend. Ellen had agreed to send a letter, confirming her identity and her story, which Miss Marple held in her hand. A final rose to bloom. As her guests arrived, the air crackled with tension. Lord Ashton, his face drawn, sat stiffly by the fire. Clara, pale and fidgeting, avoided his gaze. Mrs. Bantry, sensing drama, hovered with a tray of tea, her eyes wide. Miss Marple began, her voice calm but commanding. "Thank you for coming," she said, folding her hands. "We're here to settle a story that began in 1942, with a romance that ended in blood. Eleanor Wren and Thomas Hale loved each other, but a lie spread by Clara drew Thomas to his death. Clara gasped, her hands twisting. "I told you, I didn't mean for him to die." "You didn't," Miss Marple agreed. "But you told Reggie Cole where Thomas would be, believing he'd only scare him. Reggie, acting for another, killed him. That other was not Lord Ashton, as you assumed, but his sister, Lady Margaret. Ashton's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. Margaret? That's absurd. She was a quiet girl, barely noticed in the village." "Too quiet," Miss Marple said, her gaze steady. "Margaret loved Thomas, didn't she? Not as a rival to Eleanor, but as her own secret. I found a clipping describing a fair-haired woman with Eleanor at the mill days before the murder. It was Margaret. She saw Thomas and Eleanor together, and her jealousy turned to rage. She used Reggie, your loyal valet, to do her bidding." Clara's voice trembled. "Margaret! But she was so proper. Why would she?" "Because love can twist the heart," Miss Marple said. Eleanor realized the truth. She saw Margaret that night, which is why she fled, forging a death certificate as Ellen Winter. The photograph in Thomas's grave showed Margaret, torn out by someone, likely you, Clara, to protect her. Clara sobbed, covering her face. "I found the tin years later. I didn't want Eleanor blamed, but Margaret. She was powerful. I was afraid." Ashton's face was ashen. "Margaret confessed to me years ago, after the war. Said it was an accident, that Reggie went too far. I sent her away, paid for her silence. I thought it was over." Miss Marple produced the typed threat. "It wasn't. This came from Margaret, didn't it? Even in her frailty, she learned I was digging. Perhaps through a nurse you paid, Lord Ashton. She tried to stop me." Ashton slumped, defeated. "She's dying. I didn't want her name dragged through this." Miss Marple opened Ellen's letter, her voice softening. "Eleanor, as Ellen Winter, lives in Brighton. She writes, 'I forgave Clara, but not Margaret. The rose was my truth, hidden for Thomas. She's at peace now, but justice must be done.'" She turned to Mrs. Bantry, who nodded eagerly. "Dolly, please call Inspector Craddock. Lady Margaret must answer for her crime, however frail she is." As the guests left, Clara weeping and Ashton silent, Miss Marple sat alone, the locket in her hand. Eleanor's love had survived, a rose blooming through ashes. The twist, Margaret's hidden passion, had shocked even her, but the resolution felt right. Thomas's killer would face justice, and Eleanor's truth was free. Outside, the stars shone over St. Mary Mead, the village quiet once more. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her knitting needles clicking. Love and betrayal, coded in a letter, had found their end, and she, as always, had listened to the whispers of the past. Epilogue. The rose remembered. The summer sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, the village alive with the hum of bees and the laughter of children playing on the green. 3 months had passed since Miss Jane Marple unravelled the mystery of the coded love letter. and the ripples of that truth had settled, leaving the village quieter but wiser. In her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the window, a letter from Brighton in her hand, her knitting needles resting in her lap. Lady Margaret, frail and confined to a nursing home, had confessed to Inspector Craddock with a clarity that surprised everyone. Her love for Thomas Hale, unspoken and unreturned, had festered into a moment of madness, and Reggie Cole, eager to curry favour, had turned her whispered wish into murder. She would spend her final days under house arrest, her name a whisper in the village's memory. Lord Ashton, shamed by his silence, had retreated to his manor, his influence diminished. Clara Langley, racked with guilt, had moved to a convent, seeking atonement for her part in the lie that cost Thomas his life. But it was Eleanor Wren, Ellen Winter, who filled Miss Marple's thoughts now. The letter, written in a steady hand, was brief but poignant. "Dear Miss Marple, I owe you my peace. Thomas's truth is known, and I can live without fear. The rose was my heart, and you gave it back to me. Yours, Ellen." Miss Marple smiled, folding the letter carefully. She had visited Ellen in Brighton, a small woman with silver hair and violet eyes, living in a seaside cottage filled with books and memories. Over tea, Ellen had shared stories of Thomas, his quiet strength, his dreams of a simple life. She had never remarried, her heart bound to the carpenter who'd carved her a rose. The locket returned to her, now hung around her neck, a testament to a love that endured. In St. Mary Mead, the oak by the mill stood as it always had, its roots cradling the stone where Eleanor's ribbon once lay. Peter Grayson, now a regular visitor to Miss Marple's cottage, had suggested a memorial for Thomas, a plaque funded by the village to honour a man wronged by lies. It read simply, "Thomas Hale, beloved, 1918 to 1942. Miss Marple had attended the unveiling, her eyes misty as Mrs. Bantry squeezed her hand. As she picked up her knitting, Miss Marple's gaze fell on the rose-carved box, now a keepsake on her mantle. The coded letter, its secrets laid bare, was tucked inside, a reminder that even in a village as small as St. Mary Mead, love could spark both beauty and tragedy. She thought of Eleanor, free at last, and Thomas, whose truth had found the light. Outside, a breeze carried the scent of roses from her garden, and Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. The mystery was solved, the romance preserved, and the village, as ever, whispered on.